right, happy Monday. Hope you all had a great weekend and got outside in that perfect weather that we had. It's good, actually. We had a little bit of rain here, of course, when the kids were out on the playground. But we wanted to give you the second part of our reflection on voting, and once again, doing our best to present to you the teaching of the church rather than our own views or opinions on the things that we are all faced with as we go to vote in a couple weeks. So
let's dive in.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's get into it. So maybe a question that a lot of people like to bring up, all issues are essentially the same, and I have to vote according to my conscience as to what I think is best. So here's kind of the Catholic response to that. And the way that I like to look at it is kind of painting a pretty big analogy on this. So the question is, what is the most important issue? What are the most important issues for us as Catholics? So the way that I look at it is this. Let's pretend our country's like a house. It's not a bad house. It's a good house. It does its job, but it's got some issues. It's got some home improvement issues maybe that need to get fixed. It's maybe got some leaky pipes, a gas leak, some spotty Wi-Fi, and a cracked foundation. So leaky pipes, gas leak, spotty Wi-Fi, and a cracked foundation. Now, you're all homeowners who are watching, and so as a homeowner, which of those issues you would want to fix first. It's the gas leak, right? If you don't fix that gas leak, you're probably not going to have a house pretty soon. No other issue in that house would compare to the gas leak. Not all home improvement issues are created equal, as Mr. Handyman here can probably attest as well. So it's the same with an election. Again, not all, you would want to fix that gas leak before anything else in that house. And I think in our country, we have a raging gas leak. It's the culture of death and the many offenses against human life, whether it's abortion, euthanasia, the death penalty, or embryonic stem cell research. It's vitally important that we as a country fix that gas leak before anything else. Now, your plumber or your cable guy, might say, listen, you are way too obsessed with gas leaks. Spotty Wi-Fi is just as important as fixing a gas leak. Now, again, you're all homeowners, and you all know that's a bunch of malarkey. Spotty Wi-Fi is a matter of comfort and convenience, whereas that gas leak is a matter of life and death. So in an election, we have to really examine what are the most pressing issues. And just as we would want to fix that gas leak before anything else in the house, we should promote life in our country before anything else. And then kind of from that, maybe the thing you'd want to fix afterward is that cracked foundation. The house could very easily collapse on itself because of a bad foundation. And I think that's a good image for the family. The family is the foundation of society. And we have to do our part to make sure that our families are strengthened, whether it's with the definition of marriage or policies that promote and protect family life. It's a vitally important thing to do in our country. And then after we fix the gas leak, after we fix the cracked foundation, then we would look at those issues of the pipes and the Wi-Fi, which would be issues like immigration or the economy or healthcare or the environment or whatever that might be. Those are issues of our welfare as opposed to issues that are life and death. So no, not all issues are weighted the same. We have to acknowledge that. Again, we wouldn't weight all those home improvement issues in the same way. We don't actually operate like that. So it's important that we recognize that there is a hierarchy of goods that we are called to promote in our country and in our elections.
Absolutely. Yeah, and my family and we were together yesterday kind of joking about some of the horrible vehicles that we've had in our family over the years. And the same principle applies. In other parts of our life, we know how to prioritize and to take care of the most urgent, most dangerous things first. And then it's not that the others aren't important or relevant, but they're not as pressing as those. So that's a great analogy.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
One other thing too with issues that I came across a reflection recently, and they said when you vote, when any of us vote, we stand before, at the end of our life, we stand before God, and maybe we will also stand before all the people that were affected by the votes that we cast. And I thought that's really powerful to think about, what are my priorities and who are the people affected by those priorities. And then when I stand before God and kind of all the campaigning and all of the rationalizing is gone, will I still be able to justify to the people that were affected by my vote? Will I be able to say, hey, this really was the most important thing and I held it as so? Or is it possible that I may be put to shame, as I stand before God, and those people whose lives were affected or worse by my vote, will they kind of be able to testify for me on behalf of God, before God, or not? So that was just for me. Last month I came across that. I've been thinking a lot about that. I think it's a very powerful reflection, once again, of the spiritual importance of our voting.
Yeah. So I think, let's go back to the house analogy. If we decide to fix the Wi-Fi before we fix the gas leak, we are, in a sense, responsible for what might happen next. Mm-hmm. It's the same with our votes too. So.
All right. So we talked last video about why bother voting. It's just one person. And we talked about how God works through individuals, how history is full of single people that God used to do incredible things. So we kind of handled it from that point, but now we want to go and take on that question a little bit differently. Why, when we feel like we don't want to vote, well, there's an issue of common good. One of the reasons we are obliged to participate in the voting process is the common good. Now, what is the common good? A lot of people use that term, and I think oftentimes for many people it means the most good for the most people. But that's not actually what the common good is, because if that was the case, all you would need is a majority to decide what right and wrong was. Right. And that could be really dangerous because you could have a very immoral set of laws, but you have them because more people voted for them than not. You could also have something what's called proportionalism, where you say, well, this innocent person is being affected or even killed, but his or her death is better for more people, so that makes it okay. We see this at work actually in the gospel when Jesus is condemned to death, and the high priest gets his buddies together and says, it's better for one person to die for the sake of the whole country, regardless of whether that person was innocent or not. That's called proportionalism. Yeah. So it's important as Christians that we don't think of the common good as just like a numbers game.
Right. Yeah, that's all. That's very, very important to do. Yeah. Did you want to hit on conscience?
Yes, we'll do that. Let me just
real
quick. Father Schneider's keeping me. Well, yeah, he's keeping me on track here. So the common good, then, with that understanding of it's not proportionalism, it's not majority rules, might makes right kind of idea. The common good would be the elements of the common good would be the fundamental right to life of the human person and all of the rights that come along with being a human that cannot be given or taken away by any government or person, any power. The basic goods of society, which would be food, clothing, health, work, education, culture, and the right to establish a family. And thirdly, the stability and security that comes with a just social order. So those are kind of what the common good, that puts meat on them. That's what they actually mean in real life, in a society.
Yeah, it's very, very important that we know what the common good actually means. And very good illustration of those principles. When we're also talking about common good, maybe another thing to talk about is maybe a hierarchy of goods. Mm-hmm. The things that, sort of like the gas leak or the foundation that we're called to promote more than anything else. And our recent popes, whether it's Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, or Pope John Paul II, have all talked about this idea that there are certain things that are sort of the non-negotiables for us as Catholics. The first of which is obviously the protection of all life and all its stages. The second is the recognition and promotion of the natural structure of the family as a union between one man and woman based on marriage. And then the third being at least it's described as the right of parents to educate their children, but sort of in fleshing that a little bit, it's really our religious liberty and our ability to practice our faith. All those other issues, whether it's immigration or the economy or our healthcare, those are issues that good people can disagree on. And even the church would say there can be, various degrees of those things that are okay or not okay based on the given circumstances of our day. But it's those other ones, those non-negotiables that no degree of them is even acceptable. That's a huge, huge thing. For those other issues, again, issues of our welfare, whether it's the pipes or the Wi-Fi, again, good people can disagree on them, and based on given circumstances, you can have some of those things, and the church would permit, again, various degrees of those things, and so you can have some, proportional or a portion of them. Those other ones, it's either all or nothing, and so we have to recognize that on those things that are non-negotiable, that we have to err on the side of truth, And those other ones, good people can disagree on those things, and we can have degrees and different amounts of those things in proportion to the need for society. But those other ones would be sort of the non-negotiables. As
and
it were.
I think just to avoid any confusion, it's not that Catholics can say, "Hey, I don't agree that healthcare is a fundamental human right, or that education isn't something that people are entitled to." We, as Catholics, we believe those are essential to the common good, but how we get those things is open for discussion and even disagreement. So I might say, hey, I think private schools are the best way to offer education for people, and I might have a reasonable argument. Someone else might say, I think public schools are the way. We can both be good Catholics, hold those same arguments. One person might say, I think the government should provide health care. Another Catholic could say, I think it should come through private industry. You could be a good Catholic and hold either of those positions because you're both saying healthcare is necessary and good, but we're going to get there differently.
Sure.
Same way with immigration, national security, environmental things. We are called to take care of the environment, but whether we all go to electric or maybe some people say my diesel will be clean enough, all open for debate and prayerful discussion. Like Father Schneider is saying, there's never a world or a scenario where aborting an unborn child is a moral good or allowed. There's just no, it's what we call intrinsically evil. There's never a time where that would be good or allowable. The same is true for the redefinition of marriage. Marriage isn't ours to redefine. That's sometimes hard for us in a society where we kind of do things by democracy, but we believe that's a gift from God, intrinsic to the human person. Same way with euthanasia. There's never a time where it's right to kill someone to end their suffering. That is always and everywhere morally wrong. Embryonic stem cell research would be another one. We can't use another human life, even if it brings about cures or medical advancements. It's never right to use a human person in that way. So those are the intrinsic moral evils, the things that, as Father Schneider is saying, they're non-negotiables. You can't say, well, sometimes abortion is okay. We can't cooperate in any of those intrinsic moral evils. Otherwise, in some small way, even as a voter, we're promoting or at least enabling those to continue. Yeah. So that's what we want to think of as the common good is, okay, these are the basic human rights, and then which of them are open for creative ways to make better or make happen, and which ones do we say we have to always oppose them no matter what the circumstance.
Yeah. Very important to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do we want to do next?
Well, let's talk about this one here.
Gotcha. Yeah. So a number of people have maybe come up to us and said, one party is good, the other party is evil. Certainly, there's always discussions on that in every election. I think one of the things we have to remember is, as Catholics, we have to approach voting from an idea and a perspective of I'm Catholic first, everything else second. If we're more attached to party A or party B or candidate A or candidate B than our Catholic faith, then we're already off on the wrong foot. How we get to where we vote, how we get to our decisions matters. That's an important thing. So when we're talking about parties, we have to realize there is no political party that is going to be perfect on this earth or this side of heaven. We are always going to be choosing between imperfect people, promoting some imperfect ideas. Whenever there's an organization of human beings, we're original sin people, so there's inevitably going to be selfishness, hypocrisy, corruption, you name it, and so many behaviors that really do discourage us. So we should never look to candidates or parties as our saviors. I mean, after all, we have Jesus for that. That's such an important thing to remember. Now, what we do concentrate on in our Catholic faith are issues and positions. And certainly different candidates and different parties have those positions and issues. So that's why it's important that we educate ourselves on them. And we have to obviously vote for the candidates that have the proper positions that align with our values and align with our morals. And now, we also know that parties have a lot of pull nowadays. People talk about the polarization of America. There's very few people in the middle. It's much more staunch, almost like a British parliamentary system of everybody votes kind of the same way. no matter what. It's just party line vote pretty much nowadays. So we have to keep that in mind. And just remember that we are called to promote issues that align with our faith and with our values and morals, and vote for candidates accordingly. Again, for as far as right or wrong is concerned, again, there's not one party that's good. There's not one party that is evil. It's the positions that they advocate that will determine whether or not it's okay to vote for that person or not. That's an important distinction that we have to make.
Yeah, and sadly, I think in our time, parties have become so polarized that it's sort of an all or nothing. A party is either completely for abortion or against it, and that's when we believe it should always be against it. But it doesn't leave Catholics sometimes much room, because when a party endorses a position on an intrinsic evil, that really limits, as Catholics, the amount that we can even cooperate in the other possible good things that party wants to share with our country. Yeah. So that's, I think, the church has not put us in that position. Politics and political parties have put Catholics in that position. And a lot of people, when we preach about this or talk about it, they get mad at the priest, they get mad at the church and say, you shouldn't be getting political, you shouldn't be talking about politics. And it's sort of like the church is the one institution that's most qualified to talk about morality in society, and that role our political parties have tried to co-opt that away from the church and say, church, stay out of this. But these are the very issues that Jesus promised his church would be infallible on, and that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. He never promised that to a political party, to an earthly ruler. So that's where we want to have the humility to say, who's been given the divine protection to teach us in these areas? Let's follow that rather than maybe the louder voice that says, you should listen to me. Yeah. And that's where we get in danger when we start aligning ourselves just with a political party. Yeah.
Catholics first, everything else second is so important. If we're waiting for a perfect political party, we will be waiting until the end of the world. That's just a fact.
So, a really sensitive thing, but one that we want to keep in mind is really pay attention to the candidate, what they're promoting, and we have to vote based on, how that lines up with our faith, but also knowing too the power that each party has to really pull those candidates in one direction or another is something to keep in mind too. Yeah. Lastly, I think would be, it's sort of dismissive, I think, but people will say, well, it's really just your opinion against mine when it comes to these issues of life, human dignity and the family. We don't believe that as Catholics. We're not saying, hey, our way of thinking and doing things is the best and you must do this or you're a horrible person. We're not saying that. We're also not talking about everything the Catholic faith holds and practices. We're only talking about those things that are universal, that deal with natural law. So it would be wrong for me as a priest if I said you need to pick your candidate based on whether or not they think you should eat meat on Fridays in Lent. That's a Catholic thing. That has nothing to do with people of other faiths. It's not a universal truth that other people are bound to. But all of us, regardless of our faith or background, for all of us, it's wrong to kill an innocent person. Right. It's always wrong. It's wrong, to infringe against human life and dignity, to try to take that away or to allow it to be taken away, no matter who you are. So that's where these aren't really opinions when it comes to those fundamental goods and those intrinsic evils. That's something that's based in human nature.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, natural law applies to all of us. Mm-hmm. One final thing that I'll add, at least with regards to conscience, I think conscience is something that it kind of gets thrown around there, like, oh, why doesn't the church just let me vote my conscience? We're always obliged to follow our conscience, but we are also obliged to form our conscience as well. If for some reason our conscience tells us that we should go rob banks, there is something wrong with your conscience that is telling you to do that. It means you formed your conscience quite badly. If according to your conscience you feel you have to go rob banks. So if for some reason our conscience is telling us to do something that is against the moral law, then we have an improperly formed conscience. So the church obliges us, yes, follow our consciences, but also form them well. Form them by looking to the magisterium, by looking to the teachings of the church, By looking to Scripture, by looking to Christ. That's why we're offering this to you, is to help one another form our consciences after the truth, rather than, God forbid, having cable TV form our consciences, which would be terrible. So we'd much rather form our consciences here with Christ, with His church, and with His truth to help us and guide us in everything that we do. So I think that's a really, really important thing. So we have to vote our consciences, yes, but we also have to form our consciences well. And we're responsible for how we form our consciences too.
Yeah, I think that's the big point, is just going to God and saying, well, I voted or did anything according to my conscience. That's a good first step.
Yeah.
But then He's going to ask, and we'll have to give Him the honest answer of, well, how did you form your conscience?
Right.
Well, I did this, or I was given formation and I resisted it, or I dismissed it. When I have, even priests, sometimes we struggle with the things we are asked to believe as good Catholics. And what I always try to remind myself when I might have a difficulty or something I'm struggling with is, once again, God promised His Holy Spirit and His infallibility to the church in matters of faith and morals, which is everything we're talking about here. He didn't promise that to me. Also, if I'm really doing everything right, maybe I'll live to, let's say, to 100 years old. That would be incredible. But the church has been around for 2,000 years, plus it's based on the Jewish faith.
The Old Testament?
The Old Testament, yeah, that is thousands
few thousand
of
years more
past that. So I have to approach the moral teaching, I believe, of the church with great humility, because it's not only guided divinely now, but look at the history, the patrimony, the heritage, all the incredible and holy men and women who have helped form that teaching over the centuries and millennia. In my mind, it's very arrogant if I go and say, well, I know better than that. And yeah, I know this is what the Catholic Church teaches, but that's irrelevant now. The Catholic Church has seen empires, every type, every form of government has seen that rise and fall. And in these issues of life, these intrinsic evils that we brought up, the church has never changed its position or teaching. So to me, that stands for something that should at least make me pause and say, if I differ than that tradition, maybe I'm the one that should take a step back, rather than saying the church should change its position. That is pretty bold, and could be a lack of humility. That's something we want to pray about, I think. Sure. So just to recap, because I know we've said so much, and parishioners after the masses have kind of said, hey, could you guys summarize a little bit more, because you say so much, so I apologize for that.
We're both wordy. Yeah,
well, and we're both passionate about this, because what it comes down to, and what you'll hear us preach about this weekend, is we don't want Incarnate Word to vote a certain way. The whole reason we're doing this, the whole reason we're living our life the way we are, we want you to get to heaven.
Right.
We want to help be a part of what leads you to God, leads you to heaven. I don't ever, at the end of my life in priesthood, I don't want to stand before God and Him to say, you didn't give your people the truth, or these are the souls that didn't make it to heaven because you were too afraid or you didn't speak clearly. This is the whole reason we're doing this. So I think know that. We want you to be in heaven. That's why we're sharing these things with you, because it's easy to not hear them or to get bad information. The devil is the prince of lies and deception. It's our job to say, let's share the truth together. Yeah. Let's remember, in this election, there are intrinsic evils involved. Abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, the redefinition of marriage as other than between a man and a woman, and religious liberty. Like, these are things that are never okay according to our Christian faith. We cannot, as good and holy Catholics, practicing Catholics, support those things. And so we have to look at each candidate and say, where do they stand on these intrinsic evils? There are other goods involved in this election, with immigration, healthcare, the death penalty, and the death penalty is an interesting one. We live in a time now, John Paul II has talked about it, Pope Benedict, Pope Francis. We live in a time now where it's safe for society, even with psychopathic, violent people. We have ways of keeping them out of society so they cannot hurt and kill people. Back 500 years ago, maybe even 200 years ago, that was not possible. And so the death penalty was a form of self-defense on a societal level. But it's still not an intrinsic evil. It's not the same as abortion, because there are circumstances where capital punishment could be allowed. But in modern times, it just doesn't seem necessary, at least here in the United States and other developed countries.
Absolutely.
So some of these other very important matters, we have to remember that they're super important, but they don't rise to the level of always wrong in every circumstance.
Sure.
And that's why we just need to know the difference as we form our conscience and prepare a vote, to recognize there is a hierarchy, as Father Schneier mentioned, in the same way that we deal with our house repair.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway,
That's about all I have.
yeah, I mean, this is the best we can do. We're trying to get this out as best we can, because we can't do all this in one or two homilies.
Right.
That being said, if you still have questions, if there's something we forgot, which there probably is, or we're unclear, we're here for you. So please,
find us after Mass.
find us after Mass. Yeah,
just
just drop
talk
us
to
a call. We're here to help, and we will continue to do that as best we can. So let's continue to pray for our country, pray for each other, and ask God to give us the humility to seek the truth wherever it takes us.